Good morning. It's time for the real news. And now, here's Barron.
Hello and welcome to the Real News, your local call-in program where we discuss current events and politics and the news not reported by the mainstream media. Today our guest is going to be Larry Pratt, President of Gun Owners of America. He will be joining us around 11:15, and then after that we will take your phone calls. But first, in the news this week, and I reported it a little bit last week, but I didn't really get to go into it, the Constitution Party has chosen a presidential candidate. A nominating convention held this week in Kansas City, Missouri. Former Constitution Party Vice President candidate Chuck Baldwin was chosen by delegates from state affiliates of the third largest federally recognized political party. Baldwin, a pastor, writer, and conservative talk show host, won the nomination from a field of 8 prospective nominees, including former UN Ambassador and Assistant Secretary of State in the Reagan administration, Dr. Alan Keyes. Baldwin, who founded the Crossroad Baptist Church in Pensacola, Florida, addressed the Constitution Party delegates in a passionate speech that outlined his concerns that elected officials from both the Republican and Democrat parties have abandoned the principles of limited government. Baldwin decried the bipartisan complicity that has allowed the illegal, immoral, and unconstitutional war that has resulted in the slaughter of 4,000 American soldiers and untold innocent Iraqis. Baldwin went on to point out, if elected, I will end the lunacy that sends Americans abroad to guard the borders of Iraq while leaving our own borders wide open, inviting illegals to plunder the wealth and goodwill of American citizens. Baldwin's remarks were interrupted by a number of thunderous standing ovations, making it clear his message resonated with the party faithful. Chuck Baldwin, a Constitution Party member for a number of years, promised that if elected, he would work to protect the lives of the unborn, abolish the IRS and the Federal Reserve, support homeschooling, and eviscerate vast numbers of unconstitutional federal programs like the Department of Energy and Social Security, which is nothing more than socialism. Baldwin promised to get the U.S. out of the UN and the UN out of the U.S., to abolish the Department of Homeland Security and end foreign aid. The Constitution Party delegates chose Baldwin over Dr. Alan Keyes by a vote of 384 to 126. I'd also like to add that Mr. Baldwin is going to be our guest next week on the Real News by phone, so we will have him as our guest next week. I want to congratulate the Constitution Party for standing for liberty and offering real change, which I think it is painfully obvious our country is in dire need of. How much better off our children's future would be if this party took control for a while. But instead we will continue the same failed policies, the same promises never fulfilled, and next we will see our government try to give us health care at about the same quality as they have given us in border security. Everyone needs to say enough is enough. We need to demand that the policies of middle-class destruction, exporting our jobs, importing illegal aliens, and taxing us like peasants becomes unacceptable to the American people. Also, it is a shame that North Carolina has a reputation as being a difficult state to get on the ballot. Limiting our choices or rather choosing them for us, arguably, is a method of oppressing the possibility of real change in our state and our country. Shame on North Carolina and our citizens for allowing this kind of censorship to continue. Preventing the third largest party from being on our North Carolina ballot is the epitome of opposing everything freedom is supposed to mean. We're going to go to Brian at this time.
Deadly cyclone puts terror hype in perspective. This is a report originally by Paul Joseph Watson of PrisonPlanet.com. The deadly cyclone that hit Burma could have potentially killed approximately 100,000 lives, the equivalent of 34 9/11s. And yet in the face of tragedies that befall the planet on an almost monthly basis, we are constantly lectured that the contrived fear of terrorism, a threat less dangerous to Americans than peanut allergies or accident-causing deer, is reason alone to let control freaks completely re-engineer society, decimate our sacred natural rights given to us both by God and under our great Constitution. Listening to the steady drumbeat of government proclamations, you think there were terrorists lurking around every corner, poised to slit our throats and suicide bomb themselves into paradise. Yet in reality, the only terror attack to occurred directed at Westerners in the last 3 years occurred at Glasgow International Airport, in which 2 morons set a Jeep Cherokee on fire and drove it into a window, only injuring themselves in the process. The menace of global terrorism has been labeled the greatest threat to Western civilization since communism, and yet swimming pools, peanuts, lost deer pose a far greater danger to Americans every single year. Why are our governments facilitating the terrorist agenda by hyping the peril that simply does not exist? The number of Americans killed as a result of international terrorism since the 1960s gives us a benchmark from which we can correctly identify and target other dire dangers to our very way of life, such as allergic reactions to peanuts, accident-causing deer, lightning strikes. Thus, all of the above have killed an equal number of Americans since 1960 as terrorism. Thus do we categorize M&Ms, lost deer, weather as an excess of evil in which we so graciously surrender our God-given natural rights guaranteed to us under our great Constitution for a false sense of security. The principal goal of terrorism is to terrify far superior societies into acquiescing to their political demands. The only way they can achieve this is by generating a substantial amount of fear, making people believe the lie that their life is significantly threatened by potential terrorism, when in reality their backyard swimming pool poses a much greater threat. As soon as we lose fear, the terrorists lose their power. So if Western governments were really trying to win the war on terror as they claim, then they would downplay terrorism and point out an individual has more chance being struck by lightning than by a terrorist attack. Should we be concerned about global terrorism? Absolutely. Should we let it be exploited by our government as a pretext to completely eviscerate our freedoms, our liberties, our Bill of Rights? Certainly not. The notion that terror is a fundamental threat to the very foundation of our civilization, as some have claimed, is simply not supported whatsoever by reality. Only by coming to the understanding that terrorism is such a limited threat to our livelihood and communicating that to others can we disarm the alarmist propaganda that governments utilize in order to enlist our obedience for the construction of a prison planet and a controlled freak policies like the Patriot Act being imposed under the justification of a hyped terror threat. Fear the deer.
Okay, we're going to go to a break, and we're going to come back with Larry Pratt, President of Gun Owners of America, and after that, we will take your phone calls. So get ready to call in and sound off. We're on The Real News, and we'll be back in just a couple minutes. We're back on The Real News. Hi, Mr. Pratt. I want to thank you for joining us on The Real News. Larry Pratt is President of Gun Owners of America. It's an honor to have you with us today. How are you doing today, sir?
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you all. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Mr. Pratt, I would like to start with the Second Amendment. The right to bear arms will not be infringed. I have always advocated that those words were chosen very carefully. Not to be infringed meaning will not be restricted in any way, will be left alone totally. Having to buy a permit is an infringement. I would like to ask you your interpretation of the Second Amendment and our right to bear arms as it was intended when it was written.
Well, I would say that you've got it spot on. We recently